Hi, welcome to our latest bonus chat. This is from our pod recording looking back over Bulls v Leinster. If you missed it, you'll find it on Apple, Spotify, and all the other usual places. Well, we have a timely enough topic for this week. We're going to look at the two-match provincial tours to South Africa in the URC. We had some experience of them in the old Pro 14 when the Cheetahs and Southern Kings were involved, but the addition of the Bulls, Stormers, Sharks, and Lions have added a whole new dynamic to the league. And when the URC fixtures for this season were released in early back in May 2024, the first thing I noticed that for the fourth time in a row, fourth season in a row, Leinster's matches were scheduled for just after the Six Nations. Now, how has this portion of the season affected the provinces overall? And does it go anywhere near evening out the traveling the South Africans have to do? Starting with yourself, Rich.
Yeah, it's. I mean, the travel, obviously, given the South African sides, is inescapable, both northwards and southwards. You just mentioned it. How is it that we always get this particular bit of the calendar sandwiched in between the end of the Six Nations and the unavailability of what is the vast majority of the island squad, and then coming up to Champions Cup immediately after this South African tour, and that's happened for 4 seasons on the trot. Clearly, that's not equitable. It needs to change for a whole host of reasons. This isn't just about being greedy from a Leinster perspective, but it's I think it's unfair on the fans, but both the Leinster, us, and indeed the South African fans. They want to see, with no, with all due respect, they want to see the Gary Ringroses of this world, the Dan Sheehans, the Tyke Furlongs, the Cian Healy's, the Andrew Porters of this. That's what they want to see, and it's pretty unfair, even more so next week when we play the Sharks, because they're stuffed with box, and we're going to have an even more callow squad, no doubt, given the HIAs and the return to play protocols. I really don't see that Deegan O'Callaghan will make it next week. So we're going to have to fly somebody out, I'm sure. Is that value for money for the fans? Not really. Is it doing us any favors? Most certainly not, because other than being able to blood young kids in what is a very hostile and challenging environment, what else do you get from it? And it almost seems as, and we have to do it. It almost seems as if we try throughout the season to do what we have done this season yet again, and that is to have a sufficient lead in the league table to be able to effectively throw away 2 matches, which is the South African tour. Now, that doesn't sit right. Certainly not with me, and I don't know if my views are shared by others. But I want to see my best team playing their best team. I wouldn't like to see the opposite. I wouldn't like to see a third string bull side playing at the Aviva against our first teamers. It would just be a walkover, and vice versa. But so yeah, I think fans are being shortchanged. I don't think it really works out. I really don't know why it's always at the same time of the year. Surely there must be an algorithm in place that can cater for changes throughout the various seasons, but it doesn't seem to be the case. To be honest, I don't know how it affects the other teams. So, for instance, Cardiff have to go down there on the last 2 matches of the regular season, and should they be in the position that they are now, immediately going from flying to South Africa straight into a knockout game, that too is unfair. And I appreciate that the South African teams also have to travel. Don't get me wrong. It's difficult. I don't know how you get around it, but anyway, that's my tuppence halfpenny worth of thoughts on these South African tours.
Yeah, I mean, we we joke, it's well, it's not a joke, but we say that URC is the best league, and that and but I do think there's an element of truth in that, in the sense that it embodies what we talk about rugby. In a sense, we say rugby is perfectly imperfect, and there's all shapes and sizes, and the URC kind of embodies that. You've got like five different nations, coming together, and the addition to South African, like literally from the other side of the world, has really made for that. So there's always going to be different setups for the different it's difficult to bring those particular 16 clubs together in the one competition. I think that's what I'm trying to say. So in terms of them coming to us and us going to them, it's going to be a different dynamic. And I saw some complaints about when Leinster have sent their teams down. When I remember the Bulls in particular, actually, they sent a weak team for a Heineken, was it a Champions Cup knockout game or something, and there are people
Yeah.
giving out about that. So it was like, well, why don't they do that? Why don't people give out when Leinster do that? But it is a different dynamic, because for one thing, for all the traveling South Africans have to do, the season does work out kind of well for them, in
Mm.
that they usually have some extra matches in January. They don't the Springboks don't play the Six Nations, is I suppose the main point. Whereas for all the other countries, the Six Nations slices the season right in the middle, and you go up to it with your players, but then you lose players to the Six Nations. You hope to get a lot of them back. It's just different for us. I mean, whatever you talk about Leinster, going down just after the Six Nations every season. There, the other provinces have traveled earlier. They've gone in the early months in November and October. They've gotten their trip over then. That's a different dynamic at that stage. In South Africa, their season is kind of winding down. They're preparing. The Springboks are preparing for their end of year tour, so there'll be camps, and there won't be players available to the teams then. So if you're going to travel there when you might have your better players playing, then it might be a different contest. So you would think they'd share it around. So it's the way the season pans out, and it's different for the. I do appreciate it's different for the different provinces. What do you think, Tom?
I'm sure if there's any South African fans listening to Northern Hemisphere fans complaining about travel, I'm reminded of that meme of Mel Gibson and on the movie set talking to Jesus, a bloody Jesus Christ. Um, uh, that aside, look, they decided to join the URC, so I suppose that's the bed they've made. But
Yeah,
leaving that aside, and South African fans would rightly have a wry smile if we're complaining. I think, yeah, whatever reason, my only gripe, for want of a better word, is we've ended up in the tour at the same time every year. Um, it'd be nice to be going down there pre Heineken Cup, October, you know, that time early on in the season for a change, and be able to go down with a stronger squad. Um, because Leinster for the last few years are on a bit of a race to try and build up a lead before they go to South Africa, because they know their squad coming out of the Six Nations, the way there are a few control players, really only possibly Gus McCarthy and Keane Healy might have travelled this weekend to bolster that front row, considering Keane wasn't involved with the last game against Italy, and Gus McCarthy was in and out and had a couple of appearances. Um, they probably would have made a difference over young Smith and young Soraka, who sort of is playing for Clontarf one week and then down to Pretoria the next. And in fairness, that's
different
fair,
bulls.
Just a bit,
different,
yeah.
but yeah, and fair dues to him. In fairness, you know what I mean.
Yeah,
He fronted up, and it's no criticism of that player. But yeah, look, looking at the Bulls fixtures, looking at what the South Africans are doing travel, I think they had a Welsh tour early on in the season. They played away to Ospreys and Swan, Clonettley, I should say. And then they've been back and forth. They played Connacht and they were in Italy against Benetton. I think they were up then played Saracens. And then there's a lot of South African derby games in around the November into Christmas period. And then obviously they've got I think they went up to Cast as well and got hammered. I think that was the weekend team the Bulls sent up to play in the Heineken Cup. Um, I think South Africans are struggling. If it's a sort of two-pronged thing, we on one hand, as a Leinster supporter, we'd like to see our best teams travel down there, and I think it would be a great tour. It would be more. I would think more than twice about going down if for a week if I could get permission from the boss to see those two games with a fuller squad. The other side of the coin is that the travel is affecting the South African team's ability to compete in Europe. It's no surprise there's very few of them, if any, left in the knockouts. I haven't looked at the draw since the last round of fixtures, but I know the Bulls dropped out, and I'm pretty sure the rest of them have as well. So that's not good either. And what the magic recipe is, I don't know. As Rich rightly pointed out, South Africa is where it is geographically. There's nothing we can do with that. And we can have our own little personal gripe about when we have to travel down there, and that is important to us as Leinster fans. But there's a bigger issue there about sort of from the South African teams traveling and it affecting the Heineken Cup, the quality of some of those matches, and affecting some of the matches for the amount of travel they have to do as well, up and down to Europe, maybe half a dozen times compared to the week we go down there, or 8 days we go down there for. So yeah, I said Mel Gibson and Jesus Christ, it's complaining about the travel. But yeah, it would be nice if it was pre-November for once. A couple of teams I think Munster went down there in October, if I'm not mistaken, and it allows a stronger unit go down there. It would just be a better spectacle, I think. And I think if it was earlier on in the season, if you could have a fairly full strength Bulls team against a fairly full strength Leinster or Stormers, big crowd down in Cape Town, I think it would encourage the crowds are on an upward trajectory in South Africa. Starting to buy, it takes a few years to buy into the league and buy into some rivalries, and I think the league has got to do whatever they got to do to keep that going, to encourage it. And I'm not saying you cherry pick fixtures to make that happen, but because you want all teams to be treated equally. But I think there's a chance there maybe outside the test windows to have more high profile games, because we've seen the intensity of the games in the playoffs. You look at Munster winning down there, Glasgow winning down there, the Bulls coming up and beating us in the first year in the RDS in a semi-final, and then we going down there last year and losing. So yeah, they're the intensity games that will give the league a bit of a higher profile. So I think the challenge for the league is if possible to get more of those fixtures in the regular season, and create more sort of tension going forward throughout the league, rather than like ultimately, even though we've won whatever we said 16 games out of 16 this year going into this weekend against the Bulls, we're sort of all still saying that, going, well, if we come out with a losing bonus point, we'd be happy enough, considering. You don't really want that to be the case either. I think even though we could have won it in the end, and the Bulls got the win in the end, but I think it would be nice to be on paper anyway for the fixture to be more competitive, and just at different times. But we're trying to marry a European season with the bits of a Southern Hemisphere season, because you've got still the Springboks playing in the Rugby Championship, which is also a factor as well. So the Venn diagram overlaps at times, but it's not overlapped enough to make for a bit of cohesive season. I don't have the answer, unfortunately, how they can correct it going forward. But I think the challenge is to try and correct as best you can, because the league will ultimately be a better product if you have more competitive games in the regular season, and not just wait to the knockouts when both teams start to can be more full strength.
Yeah, I mean, like on the travel, like I know it is a lot of travel for South African teams, but the fact of the matter is, I mean, when did the Super 10 start? Was that around 95, the mid 90s?
Yeah,
And it's not exactly a short hop for them to Auckland and Australia and stuff like that, or Argentina for that matter, going the other direction there. I mean, in the rugby grand scheme of things, South Africa's kind of isolated, so they've kind of had to choose where, and it just proved more advantageous for this to join the European competitions, and as I suppose the traveling comes with it. And there's also, it's an interesting study of their performance in the Champions Cup because it's still in their DNA. Like December was always a downtime for them rugby wise. I mean, the season built up. It was called the end of season tour for a reason. It was always in November, and then they're done. They're on their holidays for December. That was the time, and that is exactly when the qualifying rounds of the Champions Cup are. And when you do well in that, that depends on your seeding when it gets to the knockout stages. And they do, if they have a high seeding and they have matches at home, you saw what the Sharks did last season. I think they drop down into the Challenge Cup, or maybe they were already, but if you can get a run of games together and you can actually do well in the knockout games when they start in April, because they'll have had uncontested, their squads will have been together since January, and it kind of builds up then, and they're ready to play. So it's different for everyone. I don't know if it's so much as we're complaining as such, but I do think it's important that as fans, the media is always going to present this league. We have to be equal to each team. We have to say this about this team. We have to say the same about the others. But I think it's important to at least appreciate that however they try to equalize the season, it's always going to be different when you've got a league, especially this particular league, coming from 5 different nations. The Top Cut Tours and the Premiership. Well, the Premiership has its own problems. They don't need to be traveling to have its issues. But and then the Top Cut Tours, they just have too many games. I would say, they're being run off their feet. But for the URC, it's just a unique coming together of what's essentially a domestic competition, but with all these different nations. So I think it's just important to talk about anyway. If you think we're talking rubbish, you're reading this, let us know in the comments, and we'll keep the conversation going.